I know.
Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Diane Donnelly, and I am with the Donnelly Group of Keller Williams Flagship of Maryland, and I run a small real estate team here in Annapolis. And you are watching Facts Not Fear, a series born during COVID to help you to make decisions based on facts and not fears that are circulating through the COVID crisis. And today we have the honor of talking with my friend, Erin Lewis, and I wanted to read you her bio. Erin is an agent with Goosehead Insurance located here locally in Severna Park, Maryland. Erin joined Goosehead because of her unwavering commitment to take care of her clients. Using cutting-edge technology to shop dozens of A-rated insurance companies, in just a few short minutes, she is able to find the right coverage at a competitive price. She takes the time to review all of the options and customizes a policy based on the unique risks and desires of each client. After finalizing an option, Erin is backed by a service team that has the highest client loyalty ratings in the industry. So request a quote from Erin and you will quickly understand why Goosehead is one of the fastest growing distributors of home and auto insurance in the United States. Erin, hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm so glad to be with you today.
Thank you. Glad to have you. So that bio is wonderful standalone. However, I think that you have some amazing stats. Tell me a little bit about Goosehead and how well you guys are doing.
Yeah, so we started the Goosehead franchise. We launched the franchise here in Maryland 2 years ago for the company, which is super exciting. I came from a previous background, 18 years in insurance. So to open an independent agency here locally with the fastest growing company in the country was pretty exciting already. To be able to provide choices and options to our clients was exciting because I came where we only had one choice and only one option for the client. So if prices became uncompetitive, we really didn't have any other solution for the client, which was frustrating sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then so over the last 2 years, we rebuilt the agency that took me 10 years to build. We currently rank in the top 10 agencies in the country out of about 1,000 franchises now around the country. So pretty fun and exciting. I know.
That is really exciting. It's very cool. And so that people understand what Goosehead does is they are a broker, right? And if I say anything that's incorrect, Erin, you'll fix that for me. But Goosehead, you bring it to the insurance company and you say, here's all my stuff. And they look through a series of lots of different carriers to find the best fit for you at the best price, which is exciting because you go to, sometimes when you go to, for instance, the insurance company that I have, it's the one price. There it is. That's the company and your price. So I think Goosehead is an amazing model for insurance. So
yeah, I think it takes the headache out of shopping for insurance, right? I mean, insurance is not a simple product on a standalone. You know, there are a lot of different options and endorsements and coverages that you need to add in to make sure that you're fully protected. And sometimes if you're going out and you're having to shop this company, you call 5 different companies, you're getting 5 different comparisons, 5 different coverages, and you're not really being advised in any one direction. So this really does simplify the process of buying the right policy for you and your family.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Erin. And which brings us to today's topic. So either you have been a part of or heard stories of floods, so water pouring into your basement. So Erin's going to talk to us today about flood insurance. We're going to talk about what it is, do you need it, what is covered in regular homeowners insurance versus flood, and then we're going to talk about some ways to find out if you need it prior to buying. So Erin, let's start out really basic. And how do you define flood insurance?
So flood insurance by most insurance carrier definitions is when water is damaging 2 or more acres or 2 or more parcels of property.
And that is let's say your property is 1/4 of an acre and your surrounding properties are 1/4 of an acre. So if 8, for example, 1/4 acre lots have water damage, this is considered flood.
Correct.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's pretty vast, right? I mean, like you think about the water that comes in through your basement sometimes, which we'll talk about separately, but that's not considered flood insurance, right? It's only considered flood insurance where a flood insurance policy would pay out when 2 or more acres or 2 or more parcels of land have water that damages property that's typically and usually not there.
That's really important distinction.
You think of the images of of the water rolling down the streets in Louisiana when we had the big hurricane come through. Or even I thought last year, you know, we had that happen down in Baltimore where there was a lot of water rolling through the streets that wasn't typically there. So it's got to be vast in nature in order to trigger a flood insurance policy to pay.
Okay. Does regular homeowners insurance cover flood damage or water damage?
That is a great question, and is the question I probably get asked the most when we go through the policy and understand the coverages. And 90% of the time, people don't always say to me, Erin, I didn't realize this was covered, that wasn't, and this is the line, the dividing line, you know. So sudden and accidental water that gets discharged from a washing machine, a hot water heater, something like that, that's sudden and accidental, typically is covered under homeowners insurance. Okay. The second big claim that we see, or coverage question that comes up, is if you have a basement and you have a sump pump, what happens if that sump pump fails and then water is now flooded the basement? That has a special endorsement that's required to be covered that's called water or sewage, or water and sewage backup coverage, water backup coverage, basically. Without that endorsement, there is no coverage under the homeowners policy if that happens in your house.
So let me underscore that. If you have a sump pump and you do not have an endorsement and your sump pump fails,
no coverage.
All the damage is covered by you.
Yes. And
by you meaning the homeowner.
Correct. 100% of that cost is going to be your responsibility. And it is costly, right? So the other thing that I often see with a lot of carriers is they only will include $5,000 in water backup coverage. That is basically enough coverage to have a mediation company come out, suck all the water up, put fans out, cut the drywall out, and that's on a small claim. You know what I mean? You can think about some of these larger homes with large basements where there's a lot of water damage. $1,000 is not going to pay for the full cost of mediation and then repairs. So it becomes incredibly important to make sure that you not only have that coverage on the policy, but that the limit is high enough to cover. So the average claim is about $20,000 when that happens. So all the time when I quote policies, we start at $25,000 in coverage. Larger basements, we may go to 50 or 100,000. You can go up to the amount that you insure the house for if you want to make sure that you're super protected and you don't have to worry about any out-of-pocket expenses or cost. But that's a huge endorsement, and one that oftentimes is overlooked by inexperienced people in the industry or people that just don't have the option with higher limits of coverage.
Okay. So if, in keeping with that question, if there's a common question that we get is on the real estate side is, I have a weld exit and the drain at the bottom of the weld exit got clogged up, backed up, water came into the basement. Is that covered? Is that the same endorsement that would cover this?
So no, back in the day, the language on an insurance policy used to say if the drain backed up, but more and more, and I'm not sure there's any company, it's funny because I'm prepping for this. Like, I don't know of any company that we work with, and we work with all the top A-rated carriers. I'm not sure that there's a company nowadays that will cover that. What they call it is subsurface water. Subsurface water, by definition, is water that's outside of the house that rolls into the house or comes inside of the house. Not because the window was broken, not because the roof was damaged and is now falling in through the roof, right? Those would be different causes, initial causes that would then allow for coverage to extend for that. But if water, just the storm drain covers and you have water, too much water comes down and now it's coming back into the house, it's not considered water backup and it's not considered flood unless 2 or more acres or 2 or more properties had that same damage, right? And then it's got to be a lot of water. There really is no place for that under the homeowner's insurance policy. So no coverage, right? That's a big deal because we have a lot of basements in Maryland, right? So the biggest things that I always remind people, one, make sure the storm drains are cleaned out on a regular basis so that you don't get the crud and the crap,
leaves,
builds up over the seasons. Number one. Number two, if you see that that's happening, oftentimes it's a grading issue, where if you have a landscaper come in and regrade the land so that the water goes away from the foundation, you have less likelihood that the water is going to come down the steps or sit in that storm drain. The third reason, especially on older homes, it's not so frequent on newer homes, but on older homes, they used to only put in like 1/2-inch piping in the drains, very tiny pipes, right? Like today we get more rainfall in August than we probably, what feels like we did all
Ever.
some years, right? So
Yeah.
it's a huge amount of rain. So we rented a house before we bought our house, we were renting a house and they had a basement, and it was 1960 build, that small 1/2-inch drain pipe, and the landlord ended up having, not covered under insurance, right? Flooded the basement twice, damaging stuff, the mediation, the company, the fans, the whole 9 yards that goes along with that damage when it happens. But he ended up having to take all of those drains that ran from the storm drain down to the road and have the whole thing replaced with much bigger, 2-inch pipe or whatever code is now. I'm not a builder, but anybody that does that kind of repair would know exactly how to do that. And so that's the other way to fix it, is just to make sure that there's no clogs in the drains, and that that it's big enough to keep up with the water.
That's one of the things that we hear all the time in real estate is that drain causing problems. And the bottom line, it becomes a maintenance issue, a homeowner maintenance issue. Keep it clean, keep debris out of it, because it's really easy to happen. And then dirt starts to collect there, and then it goes into the drain. Then the drain starts to collect the dirt, and then it backs up. So it's really important to keep that, because it's an easy maintenance item and a big expense if it goes wrong.
Yes, exactly. It's interesting, and I wonder what the insurance industry as a whole will start to do with this, because it does happen. It seems like it could be an added endorsement. In fact, we only have one carrier, and I did see other carriers out there, but we work with one carrier that offers what's called inland flood. It's an inland flood endorsement, which if there were going to be coverage for something like that, it would require that kind of endorsement, but it's so rare. So rare. I mean, they're the oldest homeowners insurance company in the country, that carrier that we work with. So that's the reason that they offer it. But yeah.
Okay. How do you know if flood insurance is required, and is it required by every buyer?
That is a great question. So every property is in a flood zone. It's just, is it a preferred zone? Is it a non-preferred zone? Is it going to flood tomorrow zone? And so what
is it going to flood? Is that what the thing says? Is it going to flood tomorrow zone?
That's my easy talk.
So that might be a risky one to take if it's going to flood tomorrow.
Right, I know. So flood zone determinations are the report that's required to be pulled. And most of the time the lender will pull it. Really good insurance agencies will pull it. We pull a flood zone determination for every client that we work with, because flood is never covered under homeowners insurance and always requires a separate policy, unless you have that one tiny endorsement called inland flood, and then it's still not, vast, and there's limitations. So is flood insurance required? Not unless you are in a non-preferred flood zone. So, and generally, like I said, the lender will let you know if you're buying a house. We also, there's a quick resource. It's not what insurance agents or lenders use, but it's called floodfactor.com. And if you type in floodfactor.com, you can enter your address, and it's going to tell you how likely your property is to flood, using modeling and all kinds of things that determine, if it's flooded, when it's flooded. It's very similar to what we would use without being, without the letters and numbers that no one understands.
Yeah, because I looked one up and I was trying to read it, and I'm like, you really have to understand FEMA stuff.
Yeah.
It was very, a lot of jargon in there that you really have to understand it to be able to do it. So I'm looking forward to using that flood factor.
Yeah, definitely.
What about renters? I don't own my home, but I have personal property in my landlord's home. And what if water comes into the home? If you have tenant insurance, which you're required to have, I guess, all of the people who we've rented to were required to have it. But if you have tenant insurance, do you need additional insurance to protect yourself, your personal property, in the event of a flood?
Yes, you do. So the landlord may have a separate policy, but that's just for the structure itself, not your personal belongings. So as a tenant renting a property, if you want to ensure that your personal belongings are protected if a flood occurs, then you would want to have a separate flood insurance policy. And they're not very expensive. I will say, so for a preferred property, the average premium for $200,000, $250,000, well, about $200,000 on the house and $100,000 on contents is about $400 on average per year. So it's not a huge expense if you have concern about that to purchase a policy. You also, I want to make sure we cover this because a lot of people don't realize that there are two different ways that you can purchase flood insurance. The first is through the National Flood Insurance Program, FEMA options, and almost every carrier out there works through the National Flood Insurance Program. Typically that program requires, if you're in a non-preferred flood zone, that carrier requires that you have what's called an elevation certificate, which requires an inspector to go out, do a survey of the land, put down all kinds of stats and statistics and numbers about your specific property that you then give to the insurance agent, who then plugs all of that information in and generates your quote. The second way that you can buy flood insurance is through private flood carrier options, and private flood carriers aren't operated by National Flood Insurance Program, which frankly, a lot of people appreciate that option, that there's even an option out there, because if we ever have to go through anything with the government, it can take a long time sometimes, right? You're part of the process of what that is.
Sometimes it does.
Sometimes, yeah. So private flood insurance is oftentimes does not require, like the carrier we work with never requires an elevation certificate. Sometimes it can create more favorable rating, but oftentimes because they use more sophisticated technology and modeling, the prices can be better based on their knowledge and their understanding of how likely it is to flood. Where FEMA, so it's interesting, FEMA maps are dictated by Congress. They have to be weighed in. Like it can be 10, 15 years old, maybe the flood map that you're working with. You know, I'm sure, Diane, you've worked with clients where they've had to go through the remapping process in a flood zone, but now they are, or vice versa. You know, they were in a flood zone and now they're not, but it's taken that many years, where some of these private carriers are more nimble and flexible. They can adapt to the market more quickly. And so providing additional savings. I mean, just last week, we had a client over on the Eastern Shore who the flood insurance was coming back at $3,000 a year with the elevation certificate, and the private flood carrier option came back at $1,800. That was the difference.
Wow.
That was the difference between him going to closing and buying the house and not. And that's happened. I can tell you story after story where that's happened, where the private flood option saved the day for the clients and the lender and the realtor and everybody involved, you know.
Well, that could be the difference between qualifying for a home and not qualifying for a home.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, that's really good to know that. That's awesome.
The other thing I think that's important to point out is on the National Flood Insurance policy, there's no replacement cost on your contents. And you can only get a maximum of $100,000, and you can only get a maximum of $250,000 on the structure itself. So think about some of the houses in our area, you know, you may want higher coverage than that. Not always, because it's not like it's going to flood up to the second level, right? But most people would like to have replacement cost on their personal belongings if they're damaged, not the depreciated value of their items. And private flood insurance allows you to have that option.
So to recap, flood insurance covers what?
Covers when water damages property or the structure itself. Sometimes outhouses, pools. Typically, National Flood Insurance doesn't cover stuff in basements. Private flood can, but to simplify, structures and personal belongings that are damaged by water when it affects more than 2 acres or more than 2 properties.
How many people do you think confuse flood insurance with water intrusion? That is not considered flood. That happens. That's got to happen to you every single day, every time it rains and there's a flood.
Oh, right? All the time. And understanding the difference in what's covered and what's not. Yes, absolutely. I just had this happen a couple of weeks ago with the hurricane that came through, and then 2 days later we had another torrential downpour. They had a water backup claim the first time, and the mitigation company was in putting everything out when the second storm came through, and the second storm that came through caused the water to come in through the basement. And the mediation guy said, I got to stop repairs right now. Like, I don't think that part's going to be covered on your home.
Oh my gosh, that poor person.
Oh, terrible. And they just bought a new house.
Oh
Beautiful
my
house.
gosh.
Big,
That's a bad day.
very bad day. It just stinks all the way around.
Um, Let me see. I had another question here. Are there any other important water coverage that should be considered on a homeowner's policy? We talked a little bit about that. You said it's called a water,
Water
remind me, water backup. Any
Water
others that we didn't talk about that we should consider?
In Maryland, there really aren't any other ones. I'm thinking of one carrier that offers what's called hidden water damage, which is if there's water between the walls or underneath of appliances that you can't see, that might be considered maintenance or wear and tear, which is generally excluded under a homeowner's insurance policy. And that coverage allows for coverage up to a maximum of $20,000 is the limit on that particular policy, where if there's damage between the walls or under appliances, that there would be coverage that extended. So it's sort of like the gray area between sudden and accidental and wear and tear because you couldn't see it. So was it wear and tear or was it sudden and accidental?
Yeah.
Becomes
So how is
questionable.
Right, the gray area. What about condos? So I'm on the lower level of a condo. The lady up above's water, their toilet's been running, and now it's a flood in my kitchen, and the ceiling has fallen down. What is that? Besides a mess, what is that? How's that covered?
So ceiling falling down is collapse, which collapse is generally covered under homeowners. Water damage from upstairs, sudden and accidental, which arguably could be what that is. I mean, if to have that much water where it's going to collapse is generally accidental, sudden, not something that's over time. Those tend to be smaller leaks, and you just see the drips coming through, not the collapsed roof. Or the collapsed ceiling. Typically, it's so funny because I just had this conversation a couple of days ago with a client where her son's buying the condo, and that was her exact question. What if the upstairs apartment, because he's on the bottom floor, has water damage? And ultimately, if there's no negligence or the person above you is not at fault in some way, there really is your homeowner's policy is the one that's going to cover those damages.
It is.
Unless you can prove that she or they were negligent or at fault in causing the damage, in which case it would pay out under the liability portion of their policy, which always pays out for negligence or at fault. Yeah, it's the same thing with trees. Totally different conversation, right? But we've had this conversation.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day.
Yeah, where if the tree falls on your house, if the tree from your neighbor's yard falls on your house, is it covered? Your neighbor's policy isn't going to pay for your damage on your property. The language in the policy doesn't state that that's the case, right? Only your policy states that covered property insured property is covered if falling objects land on it.
And I always thought, what's that, Erin?
I said, unless the tree is dead or dying and you've documented and you've notified your client and you've let your insurance company know that the neighbor's tree is dead and dying and they're not doing anything about it, therefore there's possibility they're negligent or at fault. If you notify the neighbor, written notification, and then send all of that notification to your own insurance company, that way if there is a claim, they have prior notification that the neighbor was negligent, then there's possibility they could go back to their carrier and collect. And
I remember learning, I'm almost positive that I learned that wherever the roots come from, that's whose insurance covers that. So I had that wrong for a long time. No one asks me, I'm just in real estate, and I say, talk to your insurance company. But I always thought that it was wherever the tree was rooted, that's the person who has to pay.
No, I mean, that's not the way, maybe at some point that's the way that it was, but most policy language nowadays states that falling objects for covered property is what's insured for the policy.
Excellent. Well, Erin, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that we should be talking about today?
Related to flood and water coverage, I don't think so. We talked about the big ones. Sudden and accidental water is covered under homeowners insurance. You need the water backup endorsement in order to ensure that the sump pump is covered. Subsurface water that comes in through storm drains or overflows causing basement damage, water coming outside in, is not covered under homeowners insurance. And flood insurance is a separate policy that's required to be purchased if you want to include that coverage, where your house or your personal belongings are damaged due to water that's not normally there, that covers 2 or more properties or 2 or more acres. I think that's everything.
Okay, awesome. Kayla, are there any other questions that the public has that we need to answer?
You don't at this time.
Okay, so here's what I also want to say is that the cheapest insurance is not always the best insurance, because you can get really stripped down, bare bones insurance and get hammered because you didn't get the right endorsements or the right additions to your policy. I've seen that happen. Very recently, I had a friend who did that, and she's very disappointed that she didn't take the advice of her agent. But I think today, my hope for you guys that are listening is that you understand now that it's just not a policy. You just don't get a policy and off you go. There are questions that you should be talking to your insurance agent about, and have a very good understanding that there are additions that you should consider, especially if you're near the water or if you have concerns about water coming into the home. Because it's very expensive to fix, but not expensive on a yearly basis to get the insurance and the right endorsements. So Erin, I want to thank you today for coming in and sharing your expertise with us. It's wonderful. And I would ask,
and there's the 10 questions that every homeowner should ask their agent. We have that document. I'll post it out on our Facebook page and share it with you on yours. That way, anybody who's looking has those 10 questions that are most important to ask.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if somebody is listening and they want that, you can email us on our Donnelly group page. tdgmoves.com is our website. Feel free to do that. And if you know anybody who would be interested in learning this information, please share it on your page or share this with them. Erin and I would certainly appreciate that. And we will see you guys next week. Take care.